Good morning, Connie, Mel. Thanks for another wonderful stay in your lovely little cottage. And I'm just going to make this quick little video with some thoughts about landscape and design on your block. Just thinking out loud more than anything, but it might help to give you some ideas. So I've started up here in the native part of your block, which is up the top. Obviously you've got a header tank, at least I think it's a header tank up the top of the block there, which provides some water pressure. So that's an interesting part of the arrival to your property, in that people can either use that as a marker, or it's a bit of a strange intro. So maybe having a think about something that you want to do at the top of the block as an arrival piece, whether it's a continuation of some of the flower beds down the bottom, or a little bit of stonework or something at the entranceway, just to make that arrival quite attractive. So this is obviously mostly native up here. There's a fair bit of wattle and acacia. The thing with natives, and particularly the big gums, is that they're allelopathic, which means not much is going to grow underneath them. They tend to have quite acidic leaf drop, which means that really the only things that will grow underneath eucalypts are the other eucalypts, and even then they'll struggle, and native grasses. So I'm assuming at this stage you're probably intending to leave most of this section as native growth, which is nice. It gives the block an interesting welcome coming down through the native part of the block. Obviously provides a lot of habitat for local wildlife, and protects the block from the road noise as well, which I think is important. Not that there's obviously a lot of road noise up there, but it all helps. This is obviously on the, I'm trying to think, north is probably up to that direction, so this side of the block's probably west, which means you get a little bit of shelter from the westerly sun. And in summer, some of these canopy trees are quite tall, and that can be quite useful in keeping the heat down on the house throughout summer. So we come into this main sort of driveway section. Really, I think one of the things I would say is there's a little bit of planting as you go, I'd say, that's occurred. So we've got some native trees interspersed with some deciduous European trees, little bits of cottage garden, sort of English and Dutch cottage garden, and then little bits of blank canvas. So there's huge potential to work on this space, pretty much the rest of the block actually. But I guess it's going to start to depend on what functions you want those areas within the block to serve. So for example, this kind of driveway piece here, there's kind of a de facto turning circle that's starting to basically define itself, mainly because of the stump in the middle of the block there. But you need to maybe have a think about, do you actually want people to be turning on that piece of lawn there? Because eventually you're going to get some relatively unattractive mashed up bits of road and mud, and that's obviously directly outside your kitchen window and your sort of first living space window, which will not be terribly attractive. So you either maybe decide to put in a turning circle, maybe take the tree stump out and spread some of the blue crushed rock out onto this section, so that you actually have a defined turning circle, and then continue the flower garden from over around bordering the house to actually border that, so that it defines that space. Or you'd put in some other sort of turning arrangement, because turning is actually a little bit difficult. Then along this back section, you've kind of got a couple of deciduous trees spread along the back here. There's silver birch spread in there, which kind of gives it a little bit of a European feeling, which obviously fits with the cottage. And then you've got some fruiting trees in here as well. There's a couple of Japanese maples, another Japanese maple, and sort of a flowering plum. I think we've got some, that looks like a peach tree, peach or nectarine, and then a couple of old apples. This one certainly needs a bit of a manicure. Another peach or nectarine, So you've got the beginnings of a little orchard here, interspersed with some sort of just some attractive trees. So having a think about if that's actually what you want. I mean, obviously you've got a fairly large eucalypts, which are sort of leaning over into this block, which will limit what you can plant up against the fence there, and maybe thinking about if you want to plant something underneath the orchard as well, because you can probably put a lot of flowering plants, or even things like garlic will grow well under fruit trees, or things that will climb up the bare skeletons of the fruit trees in winter when the leaf fall occurs. You've got a couple of olives sitting out here. Once again, they're a little bit disjointed, kind of sitting in the middle of your lawn there. And there's not much to kind of link the house through to this area, so there's no path. Why would I come over here? It looks kind of pretty, but we've got a lot of sort of vacant lawn out here, which is fine. It's just something that you have to maintain, and it's kind of adding a little bit of an aesthetic. But otherwise, you could either extend your orchard out into this space, and maybe put some, a little pergola or a seating tea spot out in the middle of the orchard, so that there's a path out to sit in amongst the trees. And having to think about what that would look like, both in winter and in summer. I think you've got a little bit of a continuation of the cottage garden sort of underneath the trees there. There's a little bit of a start. There's certainly a water feature or a tap there that you can put in a water feature with. But sort of tying it back into serving a purpose, whether that's aesthetic, just in terms of looking pretty, and it being attractive, or actually producing something. Okay, so you've got your dog run. Yes, Mel, it is pretty cool. I do like it. Although it does remind me of mini golf at the same time, so I wasn't sure if that was your intention. The remnants of a sort of a veggie herb patch. Once again, sort of a little bit confused in that you've got your laundry line here, clothes line here, sitting in amongst your veggie patch, sitting in amongst your sort of your dog kennel. So having to think about, is this where you want the vegetables to be? Is a couple of citrus. I think that lemon's going to struggle there. It's not going to get enough sun, because the sun's going to come over and be shaded by the fence. I think you've got a lime or a lemon here sort of tied in. So, maybe the citrus would probably be better out in the lawn because I'll get a bit more sun that way, and they tend to struggle in the cold when they're shaded. So veggie patch, is this where you want it? There's a little bit of one inside the enclosure there, and kind of thinking about if that's what you want this space to be, and how does it function and tie into the house again. And that sort of back entrance there out through the gate and the service utility area. You've got another tank, obviously, as you know, so there's some of your water, and it might be worth, you've got a fairly large water main running through here, so thinking about protecting that and or hiding it is something you might like to consider. And then you've got the dams, and obviously you've got a fence line along the back there, so thinking about how you want to tie that space in, and is it a travel zone where people would be walking down on a walk around the dam, or is it a no-go zone where you actually block it off? Okay, and along the front of the house, you obviously got this really nice cottage garden. This terraced space, obviously it ties in quite abruptly with the brickwork, so maybe thinking about softening that edge with some flower pots. I mean, you've got the beginnings of some pots here, but you've obviously got a cottage garden, so you could quite easily put some flower pots and some long, maybe terracotta or stone pots along the front there, just to soften that edge and to hide those sort of surfaces there, the drains and the pots, or another way to soften that edge, just so that it's not so harsh. And thinking about what you want this space to actually do. Is it just the arrival space, or is it somehow a space that's also used either as a thoroughfare or as a spot to sit? I mean, obviously it'd be quite hot in winter. West is kind of up the top of the block, so that you'll get the full sun hitting this stonework and heating up the house, and that can also be softened by putting some plants or some foliage in there, just to soften that edge. Even a long thin row of pots with some soft bamboo could work. Depends on what you want in terms of tying it in with the rest of the garden. So you've got some roses in here, obviously a lot of perennial and annual flowering plants, and it looks nice from this perspective. You probably need to do a little bit of weeding there. and whether you want to put something along the front edge as well. There'd be some stuff that would grow quite well in the rocks. I think once again the arrival to the house for me is a little bit blunt. You kind of come in and you're all basically facing the rubbish bins. So thinking about whether those bins want to stay there or you find another spot for them. Maybe down the other end of the house, but screened by some plants. And softening that edge, you've got a steel drain there, which is quite sort of harsh on the eye, so that you've got a nice entranceway around into the main door there. And then obviously tying the front edge of this bed back into the lawn somehow. At the moment you've got weeds starting to grow through into the garden bed, whether you want a hard edge there or whether you want a soft feathering edge into the garden beds or out into the lawn, and how that ties into your turning circle. Over on this side, obviously you've got the old shed, and whether you want to keep that, you've got a bit of a jasmine sort of sitting out on its own, on a piece of screening. Up the back you've got your tanks and water around the side there, and a little divot and firewood, so it's quite a utilitarian area. And whether you want to screen that off somehow, whether you're going to use this garage as an actual garage and have vehicles or machinery moving in and out, and so you need access, or whether you can afford to maybe screen it off with a piece of fencing or a living fence or just some shrubs. Lots of space to think about over in the sort of northern aspects of the block. You've got obviously some trees that have been taken out, which are not particularly attractive, but you're probably not going to get rid of the stumps now. Down the side you've got a continuation of the garden bed, which obviously is contiguous with the one at the front here. And then you've got that little barbecue area, and whether you want to tie that into the back of the house through a path, maybe putting a gravel path and extending the roof cover to become quite a large sort of pergola area, so you could have some seating out there, or whether you just want to sort of screen it out or even remove it. So thinking about the functionality of that barbecue area and how it ties into the house, it's a little bit disjointed at the moment sitting over there, and if you're going to make something of it, how it's going to be tied into the house in terms of maybe roof line or stonework if you've got the barbecue, obviously. But you could maybe continue the cottage garden theme around that area to define it. But having a good hard think about why would people go there, when would they go there, how long would they stay there, and what's the kind of function of that area, and how often it would be used. Go for a bit of a quick wander down the back. You can see how just along the front edge here they've got some little daisies planted, little creeping daisies, and that really softens the edge. And I think if you were to continue that along the front of the house, it would do a lot for just softening that. I mean, it looks quite pretty here. It's unfortunately quite wasted because obviously you've got the aircon, and this is a sort of an aspect of the house that's not often used, but that sort of planting along the front would do a lot just to soften that edge and make it a little bit more palatable. So here we are, we've just got the barbecue area there, which obviously, as I said, it's got a little bit of work to do in terms of thinking about how it fits into the rest of the space. There is a little jetty, which I'm sure you know, which houses some of the pump. And so whether you sort of tie this into a little scenic area, I'm not sure if there's the beginnings of a path there or not, but have this and maybe make something more of the jetty, something more attractive and more accessible, more aesthetically pleasing as a gate up the far. I think that goes into the next door neighbour's block. But thinking about how this area might flow and how you might have a little rowboat or something tied into the jetty that people could come over here, and A, it would be quite aesthetic to look down there and see the rowboat tied up, and B, it serves a function as a kind of a way station, picnic station as you go out for a row on the lake. I know it all sounds a bit corny, but that's what people will imagine if they're looking at the property on Airbnb, and we'll be able to go for a bit of a row in the lake. Obviously OH&S, but don't worry too much about that. Out the back, really having a good think about what you want out the back here. For me, functionality, you could have some herb gardens, which would probably be better out in the front lawn, to be honest, but you could use some of this grass space for herb gardens so that there's an aesthetic looking out the back of the property rather than just the decking, but utilising some of these spaces, either keeping them as cottage garden and extending them, or turning it into a little bit of a functional space where you're actually getting some production out of it, whether that be flowers, herbs to cook with, or whether you even go full vegetable space out the back here. I'm not sure if your intention is to use this fence line for the dogs to keep them contained out the back, in which case, you know, they'd probably destroy a fair bit of the veggies. But having a good think there, you've got some lovely deciduous trees which you know, look fantastic in spring and summer. In winter it can look a little bit stark, so having to think about what the property would look like at various seasons and how you might soften that, you know, either with things that flower during winter, even wattle. You know, Australian wattle will flower in the middle of winter, with some other plants that will flower in winter, just to give it a bit of colour rather than becoming that quite stark, dark European, which might be what you like. And then to think about what you want, if anything, for the far side of the dam, because it'll, given that it's got a pretty good water supply and there'll be a fair bit of soakage into that back dam, you know, it's going to grow, whether that be blackberry or something else. At the moment it's kind of got the pines, which once again makes it quite European in looking, and I know that suits the stonework of the cottage and probably your cultural aesthetics, but is that what you want? And if so, how are you going to maintain it, and how are you going to use that space, either as an aesthetically pleasing part of the property, or whether it's and accessible, as in there's a walk around the back there, or whether it's kind of, once again, topping and tailing the block with, you know, native accessible or fairly inaccessible block at the front and some European kind of you know, fir or pine forest at the back, which is not accessible. So otherwise you're going to get nosy people trying to get around there and end up, you know, getting lost or hurting themselves. Okay, so there's some initial thoughts. There's a whole lot of utility stuff like the fire hose reels and your sauna downstairs, and obviously other bits that you need to probably have a think about and how it all flows and ties together. In permaculture we talk about zones, so having a big picture map and then zoning areas for particular uses, and uses can be just aesthetic, that's fine. The views from the kitchen window, the views from the lounge room windows, the views as you arrive to the block, or whether they're productive veggie gardens, orchards, herb gardens, things that actually will, you know, require not a lot of maintenance, like an orchard requires not a lot of maintenance, but it'll produce a whole lot of things, and that can be quite attractive to people coming to the block, because the people like the aesthetics of being able to visit the orchard or have a picnic in the orchard, particularly at different times of the year. It also then gives a different flavour to the stay or to the cottage, as per seasons. You know, you can come during autumn and there'll be, you know, if you had a whole lot of really beautiful deciduous trees planted in amongst your orchard, then it would be quite pretty to look at, if not productive. It's at least attractive, and it then flavours people's experience. They can come at different times of the year and see quite a different part of the puzzle. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. I've got to head off to work now. I'll email you this video shortly, and maybe we can have a chat about it. I'll come into Haileybury, Connie, and we can have a chat if you're interested. Otherwise, feel free to delete it. And thanks again for the stay. Cheers, bye.